This is not an ordinary message, and this is not an ordinary moment. What you are hearing right now carries weight, urgency, and divine timing. Final chance warning. Archangel Michael says, God's protection is still covering you, but it is lifting fast. Ignore this message and the protection will not return. These words are not meant to frighten you, but they are meant to awaken you. Heaven does not shout without reason, and it does not repeat what is meant to be heard once. There are moments when God speaks gently, moments when He nudges quietly, and then there are moments like this, when the warning is clear because time is no longer generous. If you feel a heaviness in your spirit, a sudden seriousness as these words unfold, that is not fear. That is recognition. Something in you knows this message is not symbolic, not distant, and not for someone else. It is for now, and it is for you. Archangel Michael stands as a guardian, a defender, a warrior appointed over protection and spiritual boundaries. When his voice is associated with a warning, it signals that a line is being approached. Not crossed yet, but approached. God's protection is still covering you. Its sentence alone holds mercy, patience, and love. You are not abandoned. You have not been left exposed. In fact, the very reason you are hearing this is because the covering is still there. There have been dangers you never saw, disruptions that were stopped before they reached you, consequences that should have unfolded but did not. That was not luck. That was not coincidence. That was protection. A shield you did not earn, but were given because God is faithful and because He gives space for correction before consequence. But here is the part that cannot be softened. That protection is lifting fast. Not slowly. Not someday far in the future. Fast. There are seasons where grace waits, and there are seasons where grace warns. This is a warning season. Protection is not the same as permission. God protects while He calls you back, but He does not force alignment. Free will still stands, even under divine covering. And when warnings are repeatedly ignored, protection does not argue, it withdraws. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in respect of choice. Ignoring this message is not a neutral act. It is a decision. And the weight of this title is clear. Ignore this message, and the protection will not return. You need to understand why this is being said so directly. Heaven does not issue final warnings casually. There are patterns in the spiritual realm, and one of them is this. Before protection lifts, awareness is increased. You are being made aware because you are still within reach. Still covered. Still reachable. This message is not condemnation. It is confirmation that you are standing at a threshold. What you do next matters more than what you have done before. That is why the tone is urgent. That is why the words are sharp. A soft whisper would not be enough for this moment. Something must be interrupted. Your routine, your scrolling, your assumptions that everything will just work out. God's protection is real, but it is not automatic forever. There is also something rare about this message that must be said. Many people live under protection without realizing it. Fewer are warned before it lifts. You are being warned. That alone tells you something about how heaven views you. This is not about punishment. It is about alignment. Protection flows where there is obedience, awareness, and responsiveness. When those fade, the covering weakens. And when the covering weakens long enough, it lifts. The title is not poetic exaggeration. Final chance does not mean God stops loving you. It means the window for this specific intervention is closing. God will still be God, but the outcome will change. If part of you is tempted to minimize this, to tell yourself this is just another message, pause. That inner resistance is not logic, it is discomfort. Truth often creates discomfort before it creates change. And this message is not here to be analyzed. It is here to be received. There is a reason the warning includes the phrase "it will not return." Some protections are seasonal. Some are assignment-based. Once they lift, they do not reset simply because regret appears later. That is why timing matters. Obedience delayed can become obedience denied, not because God is cruel, but because seasons move forward. Right now, you are standing under a covering that is thinning. That does not mean danger has already won. It means you are being given one more moment to respond consciously. This is the mercy and the warning. This is the grace and the seriousness. Heaven is not silent with you. Archangel Michael's warning is not to scare you away from God, but to pull you back into alignment with Him. Protection is still covering you. That sentence should bring you hope. But the next sentence should bring you clarity. It is lifting fast. Do not treat this as background noise. Do not let it pass like another video, another voice, another message. This is a line being drawn, not against you, but before you. What you choose to do with this warning will determine whether the covering remains or whether you step into exposure. And exposure is not always dramatic. It often begins quietly, subtly, when the shield is gone and the weight of consequences returns. This is the beginning of the message, not the end. And it is beginning this way because what comes next builds on one truth. You are still covered, but time is no longer on pause. There is a reason this message reached you, and not someone else in this exact moment. Out of countless voices, countless messages, and countless distractions, this one crossed your path because timing matters in the spiritual realm. Heaven does not operate randomly. When a warning appears, it appears because conditions have aligned. Your position, your choices, and the nearness of a turning point. You did not stumble into this message. It was placed in front of you as an interruption, because continuing forward without awareness would have carried consequences you were never meant to face unprepared. This is how mercy works. It disrupts before damage becomes permanent. Many people believe divine messages arrive only when life is falling apart, but that is not true. Often, the most serious warnings come when things seem stable on the surface, when routines are comfortable, when danger is subtle. That is when protection is most taken for granted. This message found you because you are standing in a moment where awareness must rise before protection lifts. Heaven is saying, look now. Pay attention now. If this message had arrived later, it would not be a warning. It would be an explanation. And explanations come after consequences. You are not there yet. There is also something deeply personal about this encounter. You may have been feeling an inner unrest you could not explain. Not fear, but a quiet tension. A sense that something needs to change, yet no clear reason why. That unrest is not weakness, it is signal. It is the part of you that senses the covering shifting, even if your mind has not yet caught up. This message did not come to create that feeling. It came because that feeling already existed. Heaven responds to inner signals before outward collapse. That is why this moment matters so much. You need to hear this clearly. Being warned is a privilege. It is not given to everyone. Many people continue without interruption until protection is gone and consequences arrive without explanation. You are being spoken to before that line is crossed. That tells you something about God's intention toward you. This is not abandonment. This is pursuit. It is not judgment. It is instruction. And instruction always requires a response. There is another layer to why this message found you. Warnings do not just inform, they test. They reveal what we do when truth confronts comfort. Some will feel this urgency and choose to dismiss it, telling themselves they will deal with it later. Others will recognize that later is the very illusion that causes protection to lift. This moment exposes whether awareness leads to alignment or avoidance. And heaven watches not just what you hear, but how you respond to what you hear. If you are listening closely, you may notice that this message does not accuse you of a specific failure. It does not list your mistakes. That is intentional. This is not about one action. It is about direction, about drift, about moments where you sensed a correction and delayed it, where you felt a nudge and silenced it. Protection does not lift because of one mistake. It lifts when warnings become background noise. This message interrupts that pattern. It is asking you to re-engage before disengagement becomes irreversible. Now listen carefully, because this is where your participation matters. Messages like this do not exist only to be heard. They exist to be carried. When you engage with a warning, you anchor it. When you share it, you extend its reach. This is not about algorithms or platforms. It is about alignment. If this message resonates with you, do not stay silent. Take a moment to like this video, not as a gesture to a channel, but as a declaration that you are receiving the warning. Subscribe if you feel led, because staying connected keeps you alert in seasons like this. And leave a comment, even if it is simple, because speaking agreement out loud shifts something internally. When you share this message, you may be the interruption someone else desperately needs before their protection lifts without warning. There is power in engagement when the message is prophetic. It is not passive. It is participatory. Heaven moves when people respond, not just observe. That is why this call to action is part of the warning, not separate from it. Ignoring truth weakens protection. Engaging with it strengthens awareness. Awareness leads to alignment, and alignment sustains covering. This message found you because there is still time, but not excess time. Because protection is still present, but not guaranteed to remain. Because God does not remove covering without first offering clarity. You are being given clarity right now. What you do with it determines what comes next. This is not about fear of loss. It is about respect for timing. Windows in the spiritual realm do not stay open forever, even when love remains constant. As this message continues, you will begin to understand what protection has been doing in your life, what signs you may have overlooked, and why this warning could not wait any longer. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still aware, is evidence that the covering has not yet lifted. But awareness without response changes nothing. This moment is asking you to move from passive listening to conscious alignment. The warning did not come to condemn you. It came to claim your attention before attention drift becomes exposure. You are not being rushed. You are being awakened. And what you do with this awakening will shape the season ahead. Right now, whether you have realized it or not, you are standing under a shield. It is not visible, it is not loud, and it does not announce itself, but it has been active in your life in ways you may never fully understand. God's protection is not just a concept, it is a living boundary. It intercepts what would have harmed you, delays what would have overwhelmed you, and redirects what would have taken you off course permanently. This shield does not mean life hath been easy. It means life has not been as destructive as it could have been. There is a difference, and recognizing that difference is the first step toward awareness. Think back over your life honestly. There are moments that should have ended worse than they did. Situations where the outcome was unexpectedly softened. Decisions that could have ruined you but somehow did not. Delays that frustrated you at the time but later revealed themselves as protection. Those were not accidents. That was the shield. God's covering often works quietly, because if you could see everything it blocks, you would be overwhelmed by how close danger really comes. Protection is not the absence of trouble. It is restraint placed on trouble. This is why this warning carries such weight. You are not starting from a place of exposure. You are starting from a place of mercy. The shield is still active. That is why this message matters. It is easier to ignore a warning when you assume protection is automatic, when you believe grace has no limits. But grace has seasons, and protection has conditions tied to awareness and response. The shield remains strongest where humility and attentiveness remain active. One of the most dangerous spiritual states is numbness, not rebellion, not anger, numbness. When protection has been present for a long time, the soul can become casual. You begin to assume that near misses are normal, that redirections are coincidences, that inner warnings are just emotions. Over time, sensitivity dulls. This is not because God stopped speaking, but because listening becomes selective. And when listening becomes selective, protection begins to thin. Not suddenly, but gradually, quietly. The shield you are standing under right now is connected to a grace window. A grace window is a period where God allows correction without consequence. Is time given not because everything is right, but because everything is not lost. Grace windows do not stay open indefinitely. They close when warnings are ignored long enough to prove they are no longer valued. This message is arriving near the edge of that window. That is why it feels urgent. That is why it feels serious. You are not being threatened. You are being informed. There is something else you need to understand about this shield. It does not just protect you from external harm. It also restrains internal collapse. It keeps certain thoughts from fully consuming you. It limits how far despair can go. It interrupts patterns before they become prisons. When protection lifts, it is not only the world that feels heavier, your inner life does too. That is why God warns before lifting it. He does not want you to mistake exposure for abandonment. Exposure is not the absence of love. It is the result of ignored instruction. If you are listening closely, you may notice a quiet realization forming. A sense that this message is explaining things you could not previously name. That realization is part of the shield still working. Awareness itself is protective. When you become aware, you can respond. When you respond, alignment is restored. And when alignment is restored, the shield strengthens again. But awareness without response is wasted mercy. It changes nothing. This is not about perfection. The shield has never required perfection. It requires responsiveness. A heart that adjusts when corrected. A spirit that pauses when warned. The danger is not that you have struggled. The danger is if you stop listening while struggling. God's protection remains over those who remain reachable. This message exists because you are still reachable. As this part of the message closes, there is something important you must hold on to. You are not hearing this too late. You are hearing it just before it would have been too late. That is mercy. That is intention. That is why this moment deserves your full attention, not half listening. There is more to be revealed about what happens when protection lifts and how to remain under covering. But that understanding only helps those who stay engaged. Hold on to this awareness. Let it settle. Because what comes next will connect everything you are feeling right now, and you will be glad you stayed for what is about to be revealed. Type "I am chosen" in the comments if this resonates with you. Blessing code 614 is now activated. As the shield of protection is being revealed, Hear this as a living invitation. I feel led to tell you that when you sow into this work, you are helping light reach souls standing at the edge of their own grace window. The Word says God gives seed to the sower, and right now, He is placing seed in your hand for this very hour. When you give through Super Thanks, membership, or PayPal, you are releasing oil into lamps that must stay burning. I am speaking to you directly because this is not charity, it is obedience. Heaven is watching for those who respond while the window is still open. I declare that every giver will be covered, multiplied, and strengthened. Act now. Use the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on screen, and release what God has placed in your hand. There is a moment most people never recognize until it has already passed. The moment protection begins to lift. It is rarely dramatic. There is no loud announcement, no sudden collapse, no instant disaster. That is what makes it so dangerous. Protection does not vanish all at once. It loosens. It thins. It pulls back in quiet degrees while life on the surface appears unchanged. This is why warnings are given before that moment, not after. By the time consequences become obvious, the shield has already moved. One of the greatest misunderstandings about God's protection is the belief that if it lifts, it must mean punishment. That is not how heaven operates. Protection lifting is not God turning against you. It is God honoring free will. When warnings are consistently ignored, heaven does not argue forever. It respects the choice to proceed without correction. That respect is not approval, it is permission. And permission without protection exposes you to realities you were never meant to face alone. The moment protection begins to lift is often preceded by repeated inner prompts. Thoughts you dismissed. Convictions you postponed. Moments when you felt clearly led to stop, change, speak, or walk away, but chose comfort instead. None of those moments felt catastrophic on their own. That is the subtlety of it. Protection does not lift because of one ignored warning. It lifts because warnings become familiar enough to be ignored without discomfort. When urgency fades, danger increases. Another sign that protection is beginning to lift is silence. Not God's absence, but His restraint. You may notice that guidance feels quieter, not because God stopped speaking, but because He has already said what needed to be said. When direction is repeated without response, heaven often pauses, not to punish, but to allow choice to fully express itself. Silence is not abandonment, it is space. Space for decision. Space for consequence if decision does not come. It is important to understand that protection lifting does not mean everything collapses immediately. In fact, the early stages can feel deceptively normal. Life continues. Responsibilities remain. Relationships continue. But beneath the surface, the margin is gone. Things that were once restrained are now permitted to advance. Temptations feel stronger. Confusion lasts longer. Mistakes carry more weight. What once would have been a near miss now lands fully. This is how exposure begins, not with chaos, but with vulnerability. There is also a spiritual principle at work here that many overlook. God's protection often operates as a buffer against the full weight of cause and effect. When the buffer is present, consequences are softened. Lessons are delayed. Space for repentance is extended. When protection lifts, cause and effect resumes its full force. This is not cruelty. It is reality. The world has rules, and protection shields you from their harshest outcomes. Without it, life becomes heavier not because God is harsh, but because gravity exists. You may be asking internally how to know whether protection is beginning to lift or whether you are simply facing normal challenges. The difference is subtle but real. Normal challenges still come with clarity, support, and a sense of being held even while struggling. When protection begins to lift, challenges feel isolating. Confusion increases. Discernment dulls. You may feel like you are reacting instead of being guided. This is not because God disappeared. It is because alignment weakened before awareness caught up. Another critical truth must be said here. Protection does not lift out of nowhere. It lifts after warning. Always. Heaven does not remove covering without first offering awareness. This message itself is evidence that you are not yet fully exposed. You are being told before the moment arrives so that moment can be prevented. That is mercy in its purest form. But mercy must be received to remain effective. There is also a timeline element involved. Some protections are assignment-based. They exist to carry you through a specific season, calling, or transition. When that season ends, protection expects maturity to take over. If maturity does not rise, protection begins to withdraw because it was never meant to replace responsibility forever. This is why some people feel a sudden shift even though nothing obvious has changed. The season changed. The expectation changed. And awareness must rise to meet it. What makes this moment especially serious is that once protection fully lifts, it does not always return in the same form. Some coverings are one-time mercies designed to prevent irreversible outcomes. If ignored, they are not recycled. This is why the title speaks so clearly. It is not threatening, it is truthful. There are protections you only get once. And you are standing in one of those moments now. This part of the message is not meant to leave you anxious. It is meant to leave you alert. Alertness restores alignment. Alignment reinforces covering. You are not powerless here. The fact that you are hearing this before the shift completes means response is still possible. Protection has not finished lifting. It is in the process. Processes can be interrupted. Directions can be corrected. But only if awareness leads to action. As the message continues, you will begin to see how Archangel Michael's warning fits into this exact moment. Why this is not about fear but about readiness, and what must be done to remain under divine covering. The most important thing to remember right now is this. The moment protection begins to lift is also the moment response matters most. There are moments in history, and moments in individual lives, when the spiritual atmosphere shifts and a specific authority is released to respond to it. This is one of those moments. Archangel Michael does not appear in seasons of comfort or spiritual sleep. His role is activated when boundaries are threatened, when protection is contested, and when decisive action is required. His presence in this message is not symbolic. It is functional. It signals that what is at stake is not minor, and that what is being addressed cannot be handled casually. Michael's role has always been tied to defense, order, and the enforcement of divine boundaries. When confusion increases and discernment weakens, he stands to restore clarity. When spiritual pressure intensifies around a person or a calling, he is assigned to guard what still belongs to God. That is why his warning carries authority rather than emotion. This is not an appeal driven by feeling. It is a declaration driven by timing. When Michael speaks, it is because delay has become dangerous. In this hour, his role is not to frighten you with images of battle, but to alert you to the reality that a battle already exists. Spiritual warfare does not begin when you notice it. It begins long before. The difference is awareness. Many people suffer not because the enemy is strong, but because awareness was weak. Michael's assignment here is to strengthen awareness before exposure becomes unavoidable. He stands at the threshold where protection either holds or lifts, making the line visible before it is crossed. It is important to understand that Archangel Michael does not operate independently of God's will. He is not a separate voice with a separate agenda. He enforces what heaven has already decided to reveal. That means this warning did not originate from fear or urgency alone. It originated from order. Heaven is bringing order to a situation that has been drifting. And order always precedes either restoration or consequence. Which one unfolds depends on response. Michael's involvement also tells you something else. What you are facing is not merely emotional, circumstantial, or psychological. There is a spiritual dimension to the pressure you may have been feeling. Resistance that seemed disproportionate. Fatigue that does not match effort. Distractions that intensify when clarity approaches. These are not random. They are signs that something valuable is being contested. Michael does not guard what is meaningless. His presence confirms that there is something worth defending still attached to you. Another critical aspect of Michael's role is this: he intervenes before irreversible loss. There are points of no return in the spiritual realm, not because God stops caring, but because outcomes solidify. Michael's warnings often come just before those points, not after. That is why this message feels sharp. It is meant to cut through delay, not comfort it. Comfort would be cruelty at this stage. Clarity is mercy. You may wonder why the warning is so direct, why the language leaves little room for interpretation. That is because ambiguity creates excuses, and excuses prolong drift. Michael's role is not to negotiate with indecision. It is to confront it. He does not speak in riddles when time is short. He speaks plainly because plain truth demands a choice. And choice restores authority to the one making it. There is also a defensive function happening right now that you may not see. While this warning is being delivered, restraint is still active. Certain outcomes are being held back. Certain pressures are being limited. That is not coincidence. That is the role of a guardian. But guardians do not guard indefinitely when warnings are ignored. Their role is to protect what is aligned, not to enable what is drifting. This is why the message emphasizes urgency without panic. Panic would paralyze you. Urgency empowers you to move. Michael's presence also marks a transition from passive mercy to active responsibility. Up to now, protection may have carried you even when awareness was low. In this hour, awareness must rise to meet protection. Heaven is not withdrawing help. It is requiring partnership. The warning is not, you are alone. The warning is, you must choose to remain covered. There is strength in this message, not threat. Michael does not bring messages meant to weaken you. He brings messages meant to position you correctly. Defense is not about fear, it is about alignment. When alignment is restored, protection does not struggle to remain. It locks into place. But when alignment is resisted, even the strongest defense steps back, because force is never used to override free will. As this part of the message settles in, understand this clearly. Archangel Michael's role here is evidence that heaven is actively engaged in your outcome. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are being addressed at a critical moment because what happens next matters. The warning is not the end of the story. It is the turning point. And what follows depends entirely on whether awareness becomes action. Ignoring a warning like this does not feel dangerous in the moment. That is the deception. It feels neutral. It feels like choosing to move on, to think about it later, to assume there will be another reminder if it truly matters. But in the spiritual realm, ignoring is not passive. It is a response, and it carries weight. This message is not dangerous because of what it says, but because of what happens if it is dismissed. When protection is still present and a warning is issued, the most critical factor becomes response. Silence, delay, and dismissal all register as decisions. The danger of ignoring this message is not immediate chaos. It is gradual exposure. The most severe losses in life rarely begin with explosions. They begin with small openings, a slight weakening of restraint, a subtle shift where what once felt blocked now feels permitted. Ignoring this message does not mean everything collapses tomorrow. It means the shield that has been holding pressure back begins to step aside. And when that happens, forces that were never meant to reach you suddenly have access. There is a difference between ignorance and refusal. Ignorance is not knowing. Refusal is knowing and choosing not to respond. This message removes ignorance. You can no longer say you were unaware. That is why it is being delivered so clearly. Once awareness is given, responsibility follows. Ignoring becomes refusal, and refusal carries consequences not because God is offended, but because alignment has been rejected. Protection is not sustained by information alone. It is sustained by response. One of the greatest dangers of ignoring this message is the illusion of time. The mind says, "I will deal with this later." The spirit knows later is not guaranteed. Protection is lifting fast, not eventually. Fast does not always mean visibly, but it does mean decisively. There are moments when heaven waits and moments when it moves. This is a movement moment. Delay now does not buy safety, it spends it. Another danger is spiritual hardening. Every time a warning is ignored, sensitivity dulls. What once felt urgent begins to feel optional. Embedded weakens. Discernment blurs. This does not happen suddenly, which is why it is so dangerous. You may still believe in God, still function, still appear stable, while inwardly becoming less responsive. And responsiveness is the lifeline of protection. When responsiveness dies, protection follows. Ignoring this message also increases vulnerability to deception. When protection thins, clarity does too. Choices that once seemed obviously wrong begin to feel justified. Boundaries blur. Compromises feel reasonable. This is not because truth changed, but because perception weakened. Protection does more than block harm. It sharpens sight. Without it, you may walk willingly into what you once would have avoided instinctively. There is also the danger of misinterpreting consequences. When protection lifts and difficulty increases, many assume God has abandoned them. That assumption leads to bitterness, not repentance. And bitterness creates further distance. This is how cycles begin. Not because God stops caring, but because misunderstanding replaces humility. This message exists to prevent that confusion. It is explaining the process before you mislabel the outcome. The phrase "the protection will not return" is not meant to terrify you, but it must not be softened. Some coverings are temporary by design. They exist to prevent irreversible harm while awareness matures. If the time is wasted, the covering does not reset simply because regret appears later. That does not mean God cannot help you again, but the form of help changes. Recovery is harder than preservation. That is why warnings come before loss, not after. Ignoring this message also impacts more than just you. Protection often extends beyond individuals to what they are connected to: relationships, responsibilities, assignments. When a covering lifts, it affects the environment around you. This is why warnings are serious. They are not only about personal safety, they are about stewardship. What has been entrusted to you remains protected only while alignment remains active. You may feel an inner pushback even now, a desire to minimize what you are hearing. That pushback is not logic. It is resistance. Resistance appears when truth threatens comfort. Comfort prefers delay. Truth requires response. Ignoring the message allows comfort to win temporarily, but it hands the future over to exposure. A trade is never worth it. The danger, ultimately, is not that God stops loving you. The danger is that love continues while protection lifts, leaving you to face lessons the hard way. Love without protection feels harsh, even though it is still love. This is why God warns. This is why this message exists. To prevent love from being misunderstood as absence. You are still in a moment where ignoring is not inevitable. Awareness is present. Protection is still active. But the warning is clear because the margin is thin. Ignoring this message does not make it disappear. It simply removes the buffer between you and the consequences it was meant to prevent. And that is why this moment must not be treated lightly. Even now, after everything you have heard, there is one truth that must be spoken clearly and without hesitation. You are still covered. This message would not be reaching you if the covering were already gone. Warnings do not come after protection has fully lifted. They come while it is still active, though thinning. Alone is a sign of mercy. The fact that you can still reflect, still feel conviction, still sense urgency without panic means the shield has not disappeared. It is still there, holding, restraining, buying time. One of the clearest signs that you are still covered is delay. Not every delay is resistance. Many delays are protection in disguise. Things that should have moved faster but did not. Situations that seem stalled without explanation. Doors that almost opened but suddenly closed. At the time, these moments may have felt frustrating or confusing, but in hindsight, they often reveal themselves as restraint. Protection often slows what would have harmed you if it had arrived on time. When God delays something you want, it is often because He is blocking something you cannot see. Another sign of remaining coverage is redirection. You may have planned one path, only to be forced, sometimes abruptly, onto another. A change you did not ask for. A disruption that altered your trajectory. While redirection can feel like loss in the moment, it is frequently the hand of protection steering you away from an outcome that would have cost you more than you were prepared to pay. Exposure pushes you forward blindly. Protection interrupts and reroutes. Your misses are also evidence of covering. Moments where something almost went wrong but didn't. Accidents that should have been worse. Words that almost slip out but didn't. Decisions you almost made but paused at the last second. These moments are rarely dramatic enough to feel miraculous, but together they form a pattern. Protection works in margins. It does not always remove danger. It reduces impact. When you begin to recognize how often impact has been reduced in your life, awareness deepens. Another sign you are still covered is inner unrest that refuses to go away. Not anxiety, but a persistent nudge. A feeling that something needs attention. That something must change. This unrest is not meant to torment you. It is meant to alert you. When protection is present, conviction remains active. God corrects those He is still guarding. Silence would be far more dangerous than discomfort. Discomfort means you are still being engaged. You may also notice that even in your confusion, there is still clarity available when you slow down. Moments where truth cuts through noise briefly. Where you suddenly see something clearly and wonder why you did not notice it before. Those flashes of clarity are signs that discernment is still accessible. When protection fully lifts, clarity becomes rare. Confusion dominates. The fact that you can still recognize truth when it is presented means the light has not gone out. Another overlooked sign of protection is restraint in others. There may be people who could have acted against you but did not. Situations were oppositions obscure. Conversations that could have escalated but softened instead. You may never know what was restrained on your behalf. Protection does not only act through circumstances, it acts through people, moods, timing, and restraint. When you are covered, even the intentions of others are sometimes redirected without them realizing it. The presence of this message itself is perhaps the strongest sign of all. Warnings are not sent into voids. They are sent into reach. If protection were already gone, there would be no need to warn you. Only consequences would speak. The fact that you are being addressed directly means heaven still considers response possible. You are not being ridden of. You are being called back into awareness. It is important to understand that signs of protection do not mean everything will feel peaceful. Protection does not eliminate pressure. It manages it. You may still feel tension, urgency, even spiritual weight. That does not mean protection is failing. It means you are near a decision point. Pressure often increases near turning points, not because danger has won, but because choice is imminent. Protection holds while choice is made. Do not mistake familiarity for safety. Just because things have worked out before does not mean they will continue to do so automatically. Protection responds to awareness. As awareness rises, protection strengthens. As awareness fades, protection loosens. The signs you are still covered are invitations, not guarantees. They are signals that you are being given space to respond before that space closes. Right now, you are in a narrow but real window. The signs are present. The warning has been issued. The shield is still holding. This is not the moment to assume everything will resolve on its own. This is the moment to recognize mercy while it is active. What you do with these signs matters. They are not there to comfort you into passivity. They are there to call you into alignment. You are still covered, but not because time is unlimited. You are still covered because response is still possible. And that truth should not make you relaxed. It should make you attentive. What you are standing in right now is not an open season with unlimited time. It is a narrow window of mercy. An arrow does not mean fragile, but it does mean specific. This window exists because God desires protection to remain, not because protection is guaranteed regardless of response. Mercy is not the absence of consequence. It is the pause before consequence becomes unavoidable. And pauses are meant to be used, not assumed. The reason this window feels intense is because it is not meant to be comfortable. Comfort delays decision. Urgency produces clarity. This is not panic being placed on you. It is focus. Heaven is focusing your attention because distractions are costly at this stage. When protection is lifting fast, mercy does not whisper. It presses. It narrows your options so the right one becomes obvious. A narrow window means there are fewer acceptable responses. Not because God is impatient, but because timing is critical. There are moments when almost any response is better than none. This is not one of those moments. Partial obedience will not hold the covering. Delayed alignment will not stabilize the shield. This window required decisiveness. That is why the message hath been building in intensity. The time for vague intention has passed. One of the most misunderstood aspects of mercy is that it feels like pressure. People often expect mercy to feel soothing, but when stakes are high, mercy feels urgent. If a child is about to step into danger, love does not speak softly, it raises its voice. This message is raised not because God is angry, but because the moment is serious. Mercy is calling you back before exposure becomes your teacher. Protection lifting fast means the margin for correction is shrinking. Earlier, small adjustments may have been enough. And now alignment must be clear. This does not mean perfection. It means honesty. It means stopping the internal negotiations. It means acknowledging what you already know needs to change, stop, or begin. Mercy does not create new instructions. It amplifies the ones you have already received and postponed. This window also exists because obedience still has power. Once protection fully lifts, obedience still matters, but the cost of disobedience increases dramatically. Right now, obedience restores strength without requiring recovery. Later, obedience may come after loss. Mercy prefers preservation over repair. That is why this window exists at all. You may feel torn internally, between responding fully and hoping things resolve without change. That tension is the window itself. Windows are transitional spaces. You are not fully in danger, and you are not fully secure. You are between warning and consequence, between mercy and exposure. What resolves that tension is choice, and choice is what heaven is waiting on. The narrowness of this window also means distractions will intensify. Anything that pulls your attention away from clarity serves delay. Delay weakens mercy's effectiveness. This is why now is not the time to overanalyze, debate, or seek confirmation from 10 different sources. The message is clear enough. What is required now is response, not research. Obedience in this window does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be sincere. Turning back internally, realigning priorities, letting go of what you know has been pulling you off course. Responding does not earn protection. It agrees with it. And agreement allows the covering to remain in place. Understand this clearly. Mercy does not chase forever. It invites, it warns, and it waits briefly. Then it moves aside so choice can take full effect. That movement is not rejection. It is respect. Respect for your will. Respect for the reality that love cannot be forced. This is why the window is narrow. Not because God is withholding, but because time is advanced. You are closer to an outcome than you realize. This message is reaching you at the last responsible moment before that outcome solidifies. That is not fear, it is truth. If you respond within this window, protection does not just remain, it strengthens. Awareness sharpens. Peace replaces tension. Direction becomes clear again. But if you delay, the window closes quietly. Not with drama, but with finality. And that is what makes this moment sacred. You are still within mercy, still within reach, still able to choose alignment over exposure. But this moment will not repeat itself in the same way. Take it seriously, not anxiously. Respond deliberately, not emotionally. And remember, what you do now carries more weight than what you have done before. Hold this focus, because what comes next will show you exactly how to respond, and why this response changes everything. You will be glad you stayed for what is about to be revealed. Type "I choose alignment" in the comments if this speaks to you. Lesson code 842 is now activated. As this window of mercy is being revealed, I am speaking directly to those who feel the urgency in their spirit. When you sow into this mission right now, you are helping this warning reach souls who are standing where you once stood, unaware but still covered. Scripture says God opens the windows of heaven when obedience meets opportunity, and this is that moment. Your giving through super thanks, membership, or PayPal is not support. It is seed released into living ground. I feel led to tell you that those who act in this window will not lack covering. Do not delay what God has prompted. Use the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on screen and move as obedience calls. This part of the message is not symbolic, and it is not theoretical. It is practical, immediate, and time-sensitive. Up until now, you have been given understanding. Now you are being given responsibility. When protection is lifting fast, the question is no longer what does this mean? The question becomes what will you do? Awareness without action does not preserve covering. Action is what seals alignment. The first thing you must do right now is stop postponing what you already know. This message is not introducing new instructions. It is confirming old ones you delayed. There has been something you were prompted to release, correct, confront, or return to, and you knew it. You did not need another sign. You needed courage. Delayed obedience weakens protection more than outright refusal, because delay keeps you in a state of half-alignment. Half-alignment does not hold the shield. Next, you must simplify. Confusion thrives in complexity. Alignment thrives in clarity. Strip away the noise. Step back from distractions that have been numbing your sensitivity. This is not a season to drown discernment with constant input. Quiet is not emptiness. It is space for direction to surface again. When you create space, clarity returns faster than you expect, and clarity restores stability. You must also choose humility over justification. Protection strengthens when humility is present. Justification explains why change can wait. Humility agrees that change is necessary now. This is not about self-condemnation. It is about honesty. Admit where you drifted. Admit where you ignored nudges. Admission alone reopens communication. God does not require eloquence. He responds to sincerity. Another critical step is realignment of priority. Protection is sustained where God is not treated as secondary. If spiritual attention has become occasional instead of central, this is the moment to correct that. Not with vows you cannot keep, but with deliberate shifts. Time reflects priority. Attention reflects value. Where you place both determines where protection rests. There is also something relational that may need addressing. Protection often weakens when boundaries are repeatedly crossed, either yours or others. This may involve stepping back from influences that consistently pull you away from clarity. Not every connection is meant to continue unchained you. Distance is sometimes obedience. This is not about isolation. It is about preservation. Now hear this clearly. Responding right now does not mean everything resolves instantly. It means direction is restored immediately. Peace follows alignment, not before it. Do not wait to feel calm before acting. Calm comes after obedience, not before. If you wait for comfort, you will wait too long. This is also the moment to engage outwardly, not just inwardly. When you act on a warning, you anchor it. Engagement is not about visibility, it is about agreement. If this message has reached you, acknowledge it. Do not remain silent. Speak alignment into the atmosphere. That is why engagement matters here. Like this video as a declaration that you are not ignoring what you heard. Subscribe if you feel led, because remaining connected keeps awareness sharp in critical seasons. And comment with intention, not habit, because spoken agreement has power. When you share this message, you are not promoting content. You are extending mercy to someone else before their window narrows further. This call to action is not separate from the message. It is part of the response. Engagement breaks passivity. Passivity is what weakens protection. Action, any sincere action toward alignment, strengthens it. There is one more thing you must do right now. Decide. not emotionally. Deliberately. Decide that you will not treat this as another warning you heard and moved past. Decide that this moment matters. Decision locks direction. Indecision drains strength. Heaven responds to decisions, not intentions. You may feel resistance even as you hear this. That resistance is the last defense of delay. Push through it. Not aggressively but firmly. You are not fighting God. You are aligning with Him. The resistance fades once alignment is chosen. This is not about becoming someone new overnight. It is about returning to what you already knew was right. Protection is not restored by effort. It is sustained by agreement. Agree again. Realign again. Respond now. And listen carefully to this final reminder, because it matters deeply. Moments like this do not stretch on indefinitely. You are still within the window, but windows close quietly. What you do immediately after hearing this will matter more than what you do tomorrow. Stay with this message. Do not mentally move on yet, because what comes next will explain what happens after you respond, and why those who act now experience reinforcement rather than regret. Hold on. What comes next changes everything. When you respond to this warning with sincerity and alignment, something shifts immediately, even if nothing around you looks different at first. Response activates reinforcement. Heaven does not wait for perfection before it moves. It responds to direction. The moment you choose to align, the thinning shield does not continue to lift. It stabilizes. And when stability returns, strengthening follows. This is not symbolic language. This is how protection works. It reacts to agreement. One of the first things that happens when you respond is internal clarity. The noise quiets. The tension that felt constant begins to loosen its grip. This does not mean all problems disappear, but it does mean confusion loses authority. When protection strengthens, discernment sharpens. You begin to see situations for what they are instead of how they feel. That clarity alone prevents countless future mistakes. Many people underestimate how much damage confusion causes over time. Response stops that damage before it compounds. Another immediate effect is the return of peace, not emotional comfort, but spiritual steadiness. Peace is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of grounding. When alignment is restored, peace acts like ballast. It keeps you steady even when circumstances remain demanding. This peace is one of the clearest indicators that protection has reinforced rather than lifted. It does not numb you. It centers you. When you respond, you also reactivate guidance. Direction begins to flow again, sometimes subtly, sometimes clearly. You may not receive a full roadmap, but you receive the next step. And the next step is always enough. Protection does not require you to see everything ahead. It requires you to take what is in front of you seriously. As you move in response, guidance increases. Silence breaks. Communication reopens. There is also an external dimension to response that many overlook. When protection strengthens, resistance around you often decreases. Situations that felt unnecessarily difficult begin to ease, not because effort changed, but because opposition lost access. Protection restricts interference. When it is reinforced, certain struggles simply lose momentum. You may notice that things stop escalating the way they were. That is not coincidence. That is covering doing its work. Another result of response is recovery of margin. Margin is the space between you and collapse. When protection was thinning, margin was shrinking. Everything felt closer to the edge. When you respond, margin is restored. You can breathe again. You have room to think, to choose, to correct. Margin does not mean you stop being challenged. It means challenges stop overwhelming you. That is a gift many people only recognize after it is gone. Responding also recalibrates your sensitivity. You begin to notice promptings again. Small warnings, quiet nudges, gentle checks. These had not disappeared entirely, but they had been muffled. Alignment clears the channel. Sensitivity returns not as anxiety, but as awareness. Awareness is one of the strongest forms of protection. When you sense danger early, you do not need rescue later. It is important to understand that response does not erase the seriousness of this moment. It resolves it. A warning does not become irrelevant. It becomes fulfilled. Heaven does not withdraw warnings because you responded. It confirms them by stabilizing what was at risk. That is how you know your response mattered. Things do not spiral. They settle. There is also a long-term effect to response that reaches beyond this moment. When you respond under pressure, it strengthens your spiritual posture. You become quicker to adjust in the future, less resistant, more attentive. That posture sustains protection across season. Many people lose covering not because they are defiant, but because they are slow to respond. You are being trained out of slowness right now. Responding also impacts those connected to you. When protection stabilizes over your life, it often stabilizes over what flows through your life: responsibilities, relationships, influence. You may never see the full scope of what was preserved, but preservation is happening nonetheless. Protection rarely operates in isolation. It covers networks, not just individuals. Do not expect response to feel dramatic. Often it feels quiet, firm, resolved. That quietness is not insignificance, it is strength. Loud reactions fade quickly. Firm decisions hold. What matters is not how intense your response feels, but how real it is. Heaven responds to reality, not performance. There may still be work ahead. Obedience may still require adjustments. But those adjustments will now come from a place of stability, not crisis. That is the difference response makes. It moves you from the edge back onto solid ground. If you have responded already, even internally, take note of what you feel right now. That steadiness, that sense of seriousness mixed with relief, that is confirmation. Protection does not need to announce itself. Its effects speak for it. This part of the message exists to show you that responding is not about avoiding punishment. It is about restoring flow. Flow of guidance. Flow of peace. Flow of protection. And when flow is restored, forward movement becomes safe again. What comes next will address the other side of this choice, the path many take when they do not respond. Not to frighten you, but to clarify the contrast. Because clarity protects those who pay attention. What happens if you do nothing after hearing this is not immediate destruction, and that is precisely why so many misunderstand it. The consequences of not responding rarely arrive as a sudden collapse. They arrive as exposure. Slow, quiet, cumulative exposure. The shield does not shatter. It steps aside. And when it does, life begins to feel heavier in ways that are difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. The first thing that happens when you do not respond is the loss of restraint. Things that were once held back begin to advance. Temptations feel stronger. Conflicts escalate faster. Small mistakes carry larger consequences. What once would have been corrected gently now demands payment. This is not because God has turned against you. It is because the buffer that softened impact is no longer fully active. Cause and effect resume their full force. Another change is the shift from guidance to reaction. When protection is present, you are often guided ahead of trouble. When it lifts, you begin reacting after trouble arrives. Decisions become right instead of directed. Clarity is replaced by urgency. You find yourself managing damage rather than preventing it. This reactive state drains energy quickly, and over time it creates exhaustion that feels disproportionate to effort. Confusion also increases. Not dramatic confusion, but subtle disorientation. You may find it harder to discern what is wise. Choices that once felt obvious now feel blurred. This does not mean truth has vanished. It means perception has weakened. Protection sharpens discernment. Without it, discernment dulls, and dull discernment leads to avoidable mistakes that compound over time. One of the most painful aspects of not responding is misunderstanding what follows. Many people interpret the resulting difficulty as abandonment. They say, "God left me," when in reality God warned them and honored their choice not to respond. Love remained. Presence remained. But protection lifted. Without understanding that distinction, bitterness can form. And bitterness creates further distance, not because God withdraws, but because the heart closes. There is also a psychological weight that settles in when protection lifts. Anxiety increases. Peace becomes rare. Rest feels elusive even when nothing obvious is wrong. This is because protection does not only guard circumstances, it guards the inner life. When it thins, internal pressure rises. People often try to medicate, distract, or rationalize this pressure without realizing its source. They treat symptoms while ignoring cause. Another consequence is isolation. Not necessarily physical isolation, but internal isolation. You may still be surrounded by people yet feel alone in decision-making. Support feels less effective. Advice seems unclear. This happens because protection often amplifies helpful connections. When it lifts, those amplifications fade. You are not being punished. You are being allowed to experience life without that added reinforcement. It is important to say this clearly and carefully. Not responding does not mean God stops loving you. Love does not vanish. But love without protection feels different. It feels demanding. Lessons become harsher. Growth comes through loss rather than preservation. This is not because God prefers suffering, but because correction has shifted from warning to consequence. Warnings are merciful. Consequences are educational. Education through loss is never God's first desire. Another long-term effect of not responding is regret. Not immediate, but delayed. Regret arrives when patterns become clear in hindsight. When you see how many moments could have gone differently had you responded when awareness was offered. Regret is heavy because it carries the weight of "I knew." This message exists to spare you that weight. Not responding invites it. There is also a spiritual momentum that changes direction. When you respond, momentum moves toward reinforcement. When you do not, momentum shifts toward erosion. Erosion is slow. It does not announce itself. It wears down margins gradually until collapse seems sudden, even though it was years in the making. Most collapses people call unexpected were actually preceded by many ignored warnings. You may wonder whether protection can ever return if it lifts. Sometimes it can, but rarely in the same form. Recovery is possible, but it often requires far more effort, humility, and pain than preservation would have. Some coverings are assignment-specific. Once missed, they are not reassigned. That does not mean life is over. It means life is harder than it needed to be. This part of the message is not here to frighten you into obedience. Fear-based compliance does not last. This is here to tell you the truth plainly so you are not surprised later. Surprise is what wounds faith. Understanding preserves it. When you know why something happened, you are less likely to misinterpret God's character in the process. If you do not respond, life will continue, but without the same margin, clarity, or restraint. You will survive, but survival will replace stability, and survival is exhausting. This warning is not about avoiding hardship entirely. It is about choosing the path where hardship does not have the final word. You are still before the choice. Nothing in this part is inevitable. It is conditional. Conditional on response. That is why this message has been unfolding step by step. Not to overwhelm you, but to clarify what is at stake. The next and final part will not end in fear. It will end in assurance. Because even now, the message is not about loss. It is about preservation, while preservation is still possible. This message does not end in fear, and it does not end in dread. It ends in assurance, because assurance is what God offers to those who are willing to respond while there is still time. Everything you have heard up to this point has been building toward one truth. God's desire has always been to protect you, not to expose you. Warnings are not evidence of rejection. They are proof of care. And the very fact that you have reached this final part means you are still standing in a moment of decision, not defeat. God's protection is not fragile. It does not vanish because of weakness or struggle. It responds to posture. When posture shifts back toward humility, awareness, and obedience, protection does not hesitate to settle again. This is the heart of the message. Heaven is not reluctant to cover you. Heaven is waiting for alignment to make that covering effective. What was lifting can be stabilized. What was thinning can be strengthened. What felt uncertain can become secure again. You need to hear this clearly. God does not enjoy removing protection. He warns because he wants it to remain. He speaks because silence would be cruelty. Everything in this message, from urgency to clarity, has been an act of mercy. Not mercy that excuses drift, but mercy that interrupts it. And interruption is often the most loving act of all. There is assurance here for those who choose alignment now. Peace will return, not artificial calm, but deep spiritual steadiness. Direction will sharpen again. The inner noise that made everything feel heavy will quiet. You will not become perfect overnight, but you will become grounded again. And grounded people do not collapse easily. Protection does not promise an easy life. It promises a held life. A life where weight is managed, not multiplied. If you have felt afraid during this message, let that fear fall away now. Fear is not the conclusion. Responsibility is. Hope is. Strength is. God does not leave you trembling at the end of a warning. He leaves you equipped. Equipped with understanding. Equipped with joys. Equipped with the ability to respond and remain covered. This is also where assurance meets purpose. What you have walked through, what you have narrowly avoided, what you are being warned about now, all of it has shaped discernment that will serve you going forward. This moment is not just about staying protected. It is about becoming more aware so future seasons require fewer warnings. Growth reduces crisis. Awareness preserves peace. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You are not on the verge of abandonment. You are at the threshold where awareness has been restored and direction clarified. That is not a bad place to be. It is a powerful one. Thresholds are where futures change. God's covering is not leaving those who respond. It is resting again, settling again, strengthening again. And with it comes confidence, not arrogance, but quiet assurance that you are not walking alone. Protection does not announce itself with noise. It reveals itself with stability. Let this be the moment you look back on and say, "That is where I chose alignment." Not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Not because you were forced, but because you understood the value of what was being offered. Preservation is always better than recovery, and you have been given the gift of preservation. As this message closes, carry this truth with you. God's protection is not something you beg for, it is something you remain aligned with. And alignment is available to you now. Right now. Fully. Type "I remain" covered in the comments if you receive this. Blessing code 913 is now activated. As this message comes to rest, I am speaking to those whose spirit knows this warning was mercy. When you give now, you are helping God's light reach others before their covering lifts without warning. Scripture declares that those who sow generously reap under open heavens, and this is a moment of open heavens. I am inviting you personally to act as a vessel, not a spectator. Your support through super thanks, membership, or PayPal becomes a river that carries truth to waiting souls. I bless every giver with reinforced protection and divine increase. You not delay, obey now. Use the PayPal link in the description or the QR code on screen and release what God has placed in your hand.